Which is more accurate a statement right now? The Eagles are 6-0 because they're great, or the rest of the NFL is not any good? You go in A or B? Midweek get together here on Birds 365. Yeah, it's Wednesday, but it's a bye week Wednesday, which means we're not prepping for an upcoming Eagle game Sunday. Doesn't mean we can't be talking about them, and we'll do just that with our buddy Mike Gill from 97.3 ESPN, the Sports Bash down the shore. Mike Gill, what are you doing on the bye week?
Watching the Phillies.
Yeah. How about that? 6-0 Eagles, and they're not the story in this town. That's pretty amazing.
No,
I would have bet against that.
Well, this happened, I think it was 2009. The Eagles weren't as good, but when the Phillies were rocking, the Eagles played the Giants and the Cowboys in back-to-back weeks, and nobody cared. Like, when does that ever happen? But this bye week fits in perfectly with this run here. And then they play Pittsburgh, which is a team that is struggling, although they just beat Tampa Bay. You know, there's not a game on the schedule that is going to get you all juiced up and excited that you're going to miss. So it kind of fits in perfectly here.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say people do care about the Eagles, but it is kind of perfect for Philadelphia. They can take a little rest on the Eagles, and the Phillies are making their run. But it's Birds 365, so we'll keep it on the Eagles, as they say, Mike Gill. The streak is over. One perfect streak is over. No player of the week. You're here every Wednesday. You usually announce it during your appearance. No player of the week. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was
You flipped me to the late time spot, and that's why he didn't win.
That's why.
Yep.
See, Chauncey, are you upset? Because I already see people are upset. Why are people upset about player of the week honors? 5 in a row is amazing.
Well, this is like being upset that a guy doesn't get named to the Pro Bowl team.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how frivolous is the fact that somebody wins the player of the week award? Now, Jalen Hurts wins player of the month, and that doesn't sell people, right? There's still questions about whether or not he's performing at the level that he's performed at. Yet, whoever decides these players of the whatevers decided that for the month of September, he was the premier offensive player in the league.
Yeah.
And
he was, by the way. He was. He deserved that award.
Mike Gill, want to run this one by you. I'm in my car yesterday afternoon. I'm going over to the Turf Club to bet a horse by the name of Dinger, who won. Won at 1-5 at Philly Park yesterday. I know the owner, Mr. Zachney, and I sent him a text. Dinger graduating today. So, and getting Paco Lopez is going to help. 1-5. So you couldn't make any money on him. And a 99-1 shot ran second. And I didn't have the exactness. So I'm like ready to kill myself. But I'm listening to Marks and Reese on the drive home, and they asked an intriguing question. So I'll ask it of you. Which is more accurate a statement right now? The Eagles are 6-0 because they're great, or the rest of the NFL is not any good? You go in A or B?
It's a combination of both. I mean,
absolutely. That's the first thing that came to mind with me. Why can't it be both? I firmly believe that it's both.
Yeah, I mean, look, this team won 9 games last year. Let's not forget that. Now, they won 9 games because why? They beat up on a very mediocre to poor schedule. Well, here we are the next year. They have much more talent, but there's just no depth in this league, and they have a plethora of talent added to a roster that won 9 games last year. This should not be a surprise. Now, the fact that they're 6-0, sure, the flashiness of the record stands out, no question. But realistically, they added a ton to a team that won 9 games last year. And people say, well, they didn't beat anybody last year. Well, they're not playing anybody this year either. So you add better players to a poor schedule, you're going to have a result of what you have now, a team that looks more complete and better than everybody else, because the whole league, Jody and John, stinks. Well, I don't want to say it stinks. It's just so
it stink, or is it just the same? Is it parity?
right.
Because
It's
it's always
exactly what the league wants. They want people involved, parity, mediocrity, reign supreme. We want 9 and 8, that everybody in that last Sunday is still invested in their team. And that's what you're going to get. I mean, the NFC right now has 3 teams with winning records, or four teams with winning records. 3 of them are in the NFC East. The other one's the Vikings. So yeah, there's just a lot of mediocre to bad football teams. The Eagles happen to be a step above those teams. So it can be both.
I'm looking it up right now, Mike. So the final team in the NFC in the playoffs right now would be the Rams at 3-3. So that means the Packers, Falcons, Seahawks are all 3-3. They're on the outside looking in, but obviously they have hope. Teams we think stink, like the Saints, the Commanders, the Cardinals, the Bears, are 2-4. That means they're a game out of the playoffs. And even Detroit at 1-4, Carolina at 1-5 is the one team. Everybody's involved. That's what they want. So if I say to you, the Eagles, other than Buffalo, who could the Eagles beat that would satiate this crowd of they haven't beaten anybody?
They've already beaten Dallas. They've already beaten Minnesota. Who else in the NFC? Okay, when they play the Giants, let's see what happens in that game. Outside of Buffalo and Kansas City, I think that the football fan believes in Kansas City. Their record doesn't jump off the page because they have a couple of losses, but outside of beating Buffalo and Kansas City, I'm not sure. And the Eagles certainly don't have a game on their schedule that will jump off the page and say, oh, you beat that team. The only teams are Dallas, which you've beaten, Minnesota, you've beaten, and handily, by the way. You got the Giants twice coming up. And even if the Giants have a sparkling record, I don't know that anybody's going to buy you.
No, nobody will believe in that. They'll say the Giants stink, like I say the Giants stink.
Look, and that doesn't take anything away from the Eagles. They are a tick above, or 2 or 3 ticks above the rest of the conference. And I ask you, most of the time, are you ready to put Philadelphia in the same sentence as Buffalo and Kansas City? Because for whatever reason, guys, I feel like, and maybe it's because I live in a little bit more of a transient area. You do have the Giant fan because of the casinos. You have a lot of Cowboy fans down in this region because of the casinos that think, well, the Eagles haven't beaten anybody. So if you are on the same level, are they on the same level as Buffalo and Kansas City? Maybe.
I think so.
Here's where I'll disagree with both you guys. Now this is an if, I'm giving you a hypothetical here. 6 weeks from now, if the Eagles are 11-1 and the Giants are 10-2, and that's a possibility that both of these teams could go 5-1 in their next 6 games. Nobody's going to be saying, yeah, but the Giants are a faux 10-2. When you get to 10-2, faux goes out the window. You can't do that anymore.
I
don't know, man. What did Pittsburgh race out to? Arizona was 8-0 last year, and really nobody bought them. Pittsburgh, I think, was 10-0 or 12-0 or something like that before they fell off the wagon and just fell apart.
Yeah, there are teams, because you're. By the way, I'll point out you don't believe in Daniel Jones, so you're going to be saying the Giants
defense is impressing me.
Oh, well, yeah. Wink Martindale, I think Eagles fans would love Wink Martindale if he was their defensive coordinator. Yeah, they're obviously playing well. Saquon Barkley's finally healthy. We know how talented he is. I'm not saying they don't have good players, but I don't know if anybody's going to believe in the Giants until they beat somebody in the playoffs, and even then they'll be criticizing them. But from this Eagles team's perspective, Mike, and I brought this up earlier in the show, I think everybody looks at, all right, what haven't they done well? They immediately default to special teams. That's fair. I was doing my own self-scout. They are a terrible tackling team. Terrible. Pro Football Focus has graded them 30th of 32.
Ooh.
They're tied with Cleveland. So there's only one team worse in the entire NFL at tackling. Everything else, every other category, with the exception of tackling and special teams, which we know about the special teams, is top 10, basically. Most of them are top 5. Any chance this comes back to bite them? They do not tackle well. And you still have Derrick Henry on the schedule. You still have Jonathan Taylor. you still have Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, I mean, that's what bit them in the Detroit game, right? That was the first week.
And Arizona.
Poorly, right. The games that they have been kind of involved in where they've been closer games, it's been the tackling issue on the defensive side of the ball because, look, they are more inclined to say, hey, we don't think you have a guy that can beat us over the top. We'll let you catch us, but that catch the ball in front. But that's predicated on making the tackle. I mean, the touchdown that Dallas scores inside the red zone there, that's just a poor tackling effort. There's just no, I mean, that's just, hey, waltz right in, one-on-one, and no effort to even make that tackle. So, yeah, if there's a boogeyman of this defense, it's not the way John Gannon calls the defense. It's the way that it's being executed without tackling. That defense doesn't work. You can't let me catch the ball in front of you if I can't tackle you if you catch it. And that's the problem. On those games where they've struggled, it's not so much John Gannon's getting, undressed here. He's calling the defense. They're not tackling.
And my question would be, how do you improve? Because Jonathan Gannon's going to get them all together and go, now I really mean this. We need to tackle. Is that going to work? Oh, my God. Tackling. Oh, how did we not know how to tackle? They're not going to go out and have killer sessions practicing and working on tackling. If they're as bad as both you guys are saying, which I kind of agree with, how are they going to get better at it?
That's a skill. That's a want, right? That's not something that's anymore you don't teach that anymore because you can't practice. You can't hit in practice. You have to have a will and want to get up there and tackle somebody.
So the Eagles' will and want is lacking, is one thing on the defensive side?
Not necessarily all the time. We've seen them perform, right? I think we all could come together and agree that Minnesota offense is pretty good. They've got a lot of playmakers. The Eagles tackled them fine, so we talk about, I brought this up with the Phillies. To me, I thought the Phillies, what's your ceiling? What's the ceiling? Yeah, you lose to the Cubs, and that's disappointing. You had a rough stretch. But the ceiling, if this team plays its best, the Phillies, they can win the World Series. I thought that a month ago. They had the talent to do it. But are you playing at your ceiling at the right time? That's the same with the Eagles. If they play at their ceiling and tackle, we saw how they can dominate a good offense. You can't expect them to play at their ceiling for 17 weeks, though. That's a fairy tale.
Yeah. Well, that nebulous standard of perfection, I was talking about that. I mean, you can't reach perfection. You can reach a perfect record, the 72 Dolphins did, but you can't play a perfect game. It's not possible.
Well, and we brought this up Monday, and, the Eagles are scoring, but then they're kind of hitting the skids. If they kept scoring, they would do something that no one's ever done. Oh, what are you going to average? 40-plus points per game? Yeah. That's not happening. So the fact that they're scoring in bunches can be looked at two ways. Why are you scoring all these points in bunches? But you're averaging, what are they averaging a game? 24 points a game? What do you want them to average? 40 a game? Who does that in the NFL?
Yeah. And, Nick Sirianni kind of brought that up and talked about it. And I always say, Jody, the human nature aspect, he kind of said that as well. Look, there are times, and Jonathan Gannon mentioned it yesterday, there are times if you're winning by 2 touchdowns, 3 touchdowns, and you give up a 12-play, 80-yard drive that takes 7 minutes, that's not the worst thing in the world. You're trying to get out of there with a win, and Eagles fans probably didn't like that. They want to 40-0, as most teams do, but it's not realistic. I will say, with the trade deadline coming up, and I'll throw this at you, Mike, I don't want to mess with this team. It's become a cliche. I say it all the time, and I get tired of Nick Sirianni with the connection. We're so close, family, blah, blah, blah. But it's true. I don't want – you and I talked about Deshaun Jackson yesterday. And luckily he signed with the Ravens, and I told you I don't want him on this team. Would he be a better punt returner than Britton Covey? Of course. But I know Deshaun. Deshaun isn't going to be happy being a punt returner. He thinks he's Deshaun Jackson of 25, 26. He thinks he can still play at a high level. I don't want to mess with that chemistry. Am I overreacting to that? when you talk about the trade.
No, and we had the conversation on my show yesterday, and then afterwards, I had asking people, is John right? You said, don't touch the team. What are you going to add to this team? If you brought in Brian Burns, how many snaps is he getting? Who's losing snaps? Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat. Who's losing snaps to somebody of that caliber? It's great to have someone. It's like those Celtics teams from a couple of years ago. They had 9, 10 deep guys, but they couldn't figure out where to get all these guys minutes, and it ended up being a clunky mess towards the end. Sometimes you can have too many talented players. It sounds great for the fans. We got this guy and this guy and this guy, until you have to decide, how am I getting them on the field? How many snaps am I getting said caliber of player? They can't get Jordan Davis on the field as much as fans want. People want Nakobe Dean out there. He can't get on the field. So if you're bringing in a trade, who's sitting? Who's getting replaced?
Here's where I think those who are questioning the Eagles can at least take a stand on questioning a 6-0 team. Your first impression should be, wait, you're questioning a 6-0 team? Yeah, we are. The Eagles have not played a 60-minute game yet. They have not played a game where they've been the better team on one side of the ball or the other for all 4 quarters. They haven't done that. The Bills have. So there's another team in the NFL that has had that dominating win, did it throughout the entire game. The Eagles are 6-0 and the Bills are only 5-1, but the Eagles have not had a 60-minute game yet. And I think it's fair to say we're asking for one. To say we need 60 minutes every single week is just ridiculous. It can't happen. It's unrealistic. But you can ask for one. So I think Eagle fans are within their rights there.
I think you're well within your rights to hope to see a complete game and get that dominating win somewhere. In 17, they had that win when they played Denver and just waxed them. And Denver came in with this, they had the best defense in the league. And that was kind of that statement. I think the Eagles fans are waiting for that statement of belief. When they beat Denver and scored, I think it was 51, that was that feeling of, okay, we can buy in and believe that this team can do something. But what good is it to play your most complete best game in September and October? I don't mind saving that best game. Again, I go back to everybody watching. What's the ceiling? If you believe the ceiling is higher, that they can still get farther, you don't want them to hit that ceiling in October, do you? And then say, well, what happened to that game when they scored 48 against Pittsburgh? I'm okay scoring 26 against Pittsburgh if that means I have a 45-point game somewhere down the road. And I think all of us watching and consuming Birds 365 right now believe that this team can put up a 40 burger on somebody. You're just waiting for the right time.
I'm gonna disagree with Jody's premise there.
Okay.
Their game, it was early. It was week 2. I don't think anybody knew what Philadelphia was or what Minnesota was, but at least through 6 weeks, one team is 6-0, one team is 5-1. The Eagles completely dominated that game from start to finish. You could argue, were there hiccups? Yeah, the block kick. But I told Jody I've been doing my self scout during the week. Now, if you look at Minnesota and their PFF grades, they're all good. At Green Bay, Detroit, New Orleans, Chicago, Miami, they're all good. Against the Eagles, you got a bunch of yellow and reds, which is bad. They were completely dominated by the Eagles. And right now, they're the second best team in the NFC. Why isn't that a signature game?
Well, and I agree. And here, keep this in mind, too. Are the Eagles not a byproduct of the style they play? If you're going on a 17-play drive, you're eating up a lot of clock, which takes away possessions for you to score more. Right? I mean, I can't get the big 45-yard touchdown if I'm grinding it out for 17 plays in 10 minutes. I'm chewing 10 minutes of clock. Some teams use 10 minutes to score a couple of times. The nature of them running the ball the way they do, they'll eat up a whole quarter that way to score a touchdown. It takes the ball away from the other team. It just eliminates your chances to score multiple times. So, keep that in mind, too. The nature of how the Eagles grind games out probably takes away some of the explosion possibilities in their offense. They're not breaking that big 50-yard run, it seems, so far this season. They're kind of getting these 8s and 10s and 5s and 4s and just keeping that clock rolling.
So, John, let me get this right. the game against the Vikings where they scored 0 points in the second half, you're considering that a 60-minute game?
I'm not. I'm considering it a signature win. You know, when I look at, all right, you know, Philadelphia's the best team, Buffalo's second, Kansas City's third, Minnesota's fourth, according to PFF. They completely dominated that game. They completely dominated that game. They also dominated Washington, but nobody cares about Washington because Washington stinks. They were both stifling wins. How many teams? So it depends what your adjective. Did they play 60 minutes? No, I talk about the lulls all the time, the human nature aspect. When you completely dominate a team, yeah, you kind of get, you know what?
Right.
All right,
well, here's where I'm going to disagree with you. I don't know that you can say you completely dominated a team when you scored 0 points in the second half.
Well,
that would be a disqualifier
fair,
for me. If we're looking at, you're asking me what my definition is of completely dominate a team in a game. If you don't score any points in the second half, that's not a complete domination.
To be fair, though, in that game, to say a complete 60-minute game, is it both offense and defense have to be complete? Because they did intercept 3 passes in the second half.
Oh, no, the defense completely dominated.
Right. And then
that I'll sign off on. They held a good offense in check, one of the better offenses in the NFL for all 60 minutes. Yes, defense gets the check mark. Offense gets a half a check mark.
Yeah, I mean, they had a field goal blocked. If they made a field goal and scored 3 points from 41 yards out, I mean, I don't know. But, yeah, their offense has, for whatever reason. But if you go back to that game, even with that, they had an 11-play drive where the field goal got blocked. They had an 8-play drive. They had a 7-play drive. So they chewed up the clock.
I mean, I guess it always depends on people's definitions, and they can have different definitions. But they played 6 games. They completely dominated 2 of them, and that would be Minnesota and Washington, back to back. You know, I don't know what people are looking for. I mean, they're, as I said, they're the number 1 team in the NFL. If you look at the film, they have the number 3 offense, the number 4 defense, the number 2 scoring differential. What more do people want? I mean, it can't get better. Here's where
I'll say it again. Apparently, you don't accept it, which is your want. If you want, they scored 0 points against Washington in the second half. It doesn't get the check mark. You can't go an entire half against a mediocre defense at best and say, complete game, 60 minutes. Not for me. Maybe I'm a harder grader than you are.
I use the term stifling domination. Again, it depends on your definition. Here's where I'll go. Here's where I'll go with both you guys. I think it's more likely that everyone's saying the Eagles, if they play a complete game, I'll use Jody's definition. How good could they possibly, if they put it together for 4 quarters? I think it's more likely post-bye they play closer to the mean, less dominant than more dominant, just because it's tough to be more dominant than they are right now. How many teams can you point to that finish top 5 in both offense, defense, 2 in scoring differential, 1 in film study? How much better can it realistically get is my question. So for people looking for better, is that realistic?
Yeah, I absolutely think so.
Well, it can be better. They're averaging.
Well, I guess you could be 1-1-1.
No, I'm talking about the ability to balance out an entire game over 60 minutes. I think there's something to be said to be part of what the stats that you're quoting, John, are compiled at the end of the game. And if one half you're so well off the charts, you can be okay and mediocre in the second half, and you're still one of the best in the NFL. I'd rather see, at least I want to see one game, just one game, so I know they're capable of doing it from kickoff, or I should say deferral, to.
Do you not think, Jody,
the entire game?
Do you have to see it, or do you not believe they can?
Until I see it, I can't guarantee it.
All right.
I'd have to look this up, but in my lifetime, the best football team I ever saw was the what was it, 85 Bears. Most dominant football team I've ever seen. I'll try to look it up in a break. I'm pretty sure they weren't three. They were number one in defense. I know that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure they weren't top 5 in offense. They're probably top 5 in scoring offense.
I'll tell you the team that was the best in your lifetime, my lifetime. Gill's a little younger than us, but probably his lifetime as well, was those early 90 Cowboys. With all those
great.
Hall of Famers. They just beat the snot out of you on offense. Jimmy Johnson, we got 5 plays. Go ahead and try and stop us. And nobody could. And they had Hall of Famers on defense too. Those early 90 Jimmy Johnson coach Cowboy teams are the best teams that I've seen in the last 30 years.
The best individual team to me is still the 85 Bears, but you're
85
right.
Bears, by the way, averaged 28.5 points a game. They were second out of 28.
They were dominant. The Cowboys were dominant for a longer period of time, but as good as their defense was at times, it wasn't as good as the offense. The offense kind of ran that team with the offensive line.
Same as comparing the Bears to the you might just gave us a stat.
But that's what I'm saying.
In the league in scoring.
But that's my point, Jody. That's my point. It's tough to be top 5 in both. It's tough. It rarely happens. It does happen. It rarely happens, and that's why the standard that not only Jody McDonald has expounded, but Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni talk about this nebulous standard. We're not up to our standard.
But
we're not up to our standard. Just stay at this standard. If they stay at this standard,
both of you guys, it seems to me you're dismissing this. The Eagles are averaging over 21 points per first half this year. They're number 1 in the league by a lot. They're averaging less than 6 points in the second half. They're 31st in scoring in the second half. Can you not look at that and go, whoa, that doesn't make sense? Why would you be so much better in the first and not as good in the second half, and not say that is something that you should at least be investigating and trying to figure out?
Well, it would be something. It would be something if their defense was a problem. It's not. So far, they're only giving up 17 a game. They scored 27. So the necessity for them to score hasn't been there. Your concern is valid. If they need to, can they? I would suggest, we've seen evidence that
we've already seen it. We've already seen the 4-minute drive.
They have taken their foot off the gas and then put it back down on the pedal when needed. But their defense that's the point. A lot of people don't look at this defense as a quote-unquote dominating defense. I used to host a show with Darwin Walker, and he used to say all the time, Jim Johnson told us, I don't care how many yards we give up. I don't care how many big plays they get. As long as it's between the 20 and the 20. 17 points is the number. You get 17 points, that's on the offense if we don't win the game. That's where this team is. It doesn't matter how they look, how they get there. They're only giving up 17 points a game, and they're scoring almost 27. That's a pretty dominating performance for a team, gentlemen, who hasn't reached their ceiling yet. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah. Well, that's my only point. If they stay at this standard through 17 games in the playoffs, they're going to win the Super Bowl if they stay at this standard. But to Jody's point, and
so you think they beat the Bills on a neutral field?
I think they beat the Bills if they play at this standard. You just told me
earlier today that the Bills would be a 3.5 point choice.
Because I think the Bills are a better team, and I don't think the Eagles are going to stay at this standard. I said if the Eagles stay at this standard that they've been playing through the first 6 weeks.
What makes you think the Bills wouldn't stay at the standard they've been playing?
I think if the Eagles play at this standard for 17 games, they will win everything.
Well,
I don't think they can. That's my point, Joey.
Again, John, I'll ask the question. You believe the Bills are going to fall off. You're theorizing the Eagles will stay at this standard, which is a reach, I get it, for 17 games, but
I'm theorizing that the Eagles can't stay at this standard and can't be as consistent as the Bills, who have the better quarterback and the more explosive team. That's my theory. But getting to the larger point, I want to get to in the second half, they've proven with the 4-minute drive, the 4-minute offense in Detroit. They had the long drive in Arizona in the second half in the fourth quarter. They had the long drive against the Cowboys. You've seen them have success in the fourth quarter. I'll also bring up, everybody talks about the second quarter, and I brought this up earlier in the week. Their first drive against Dallas was a 15-play, 80-yard drive. 14 of those plays were in the first quarter. They scored on the first play of the second quarter, so they scored 7 points in the second quarter. Why does that matter?
Yeah, that's why I said the derivation between first half, second half. The in-quarter thing can get into a gray area. To cite the example you just cited, yeah, that's a whole lot of first quarter production, but the payoffs in the second. Halftime's halftime. Yeah. There's a true derivation there. You go in your locker room, you get something to drink, you get coached up a little bit, and you come back out onto the field. That, I think, is a more realistic look and say, why are we better in one half than the other half?
Well, and keep in mind, we're talking about if they played Buffalo on neutral site. New England was favored to win the Super Bowl, and Philadelphia beat them. I mean, regardless of what your resume looks like, it's what happens on that particular day, no matter how you get there. The two games that Philly won to get to that Super Bowl, they dominated defensively. You know, they dominated the Falcons. They dominated the Vikings in that game. And then their defense was horrible against the Vikings, the Patriots until they needed a play. So, again, it goes back to, what is your ceiling? Do you have playmakers? Do you have somebody when needed the most? Last year, on 3rd down and 7, they couldn't convert because they didn't have A.J. Brown. Now, if my back's to the wall and I'm struggling offensively, I only have 13 points, but the score's 13-10 and I need a first down, well, I have A.J. Brown. I didn't have that guy last year. On defense, if my defense is struggling and we've given up 38 and it's 3rd down and 7 and I need a sack, well, now I've got Hassan Reddick. I got Brandon Graham. I didn't have Brandon Graham last year. I couldn't get that sack in that moment. Do you have the ceiling on the day that the game happens in the style of the game? Look at the game in Buffalo, Kansas City on Sunday. They played 6 months ago. It was 42-38.
Everybody, that bothered me.
24-20.
That bothered me. The whole league overreacted to that game.
And if you listen to my podcast, Believe in the Bet, I told you to take the under in that game. That was an easy bet for me.
Yeah. That was the consistent standard of Buffalo and Kansas City. It was absurd the way the league reacted to that game.
Well, we as a sports society, whatever happens in these games, we want to compartmentalize them and take them out and say that's who you are for every single game. Every game is its own individual day. Matchups. You know, I was talking to the guy yesterday. I said, you don't know when you play on a Sunday what happened the night or the week leading up. Did this guy's kid get sick and he was up all night taking care of his kid? Did his wife get sick? He had to drive his kid to school and that knocked his routine out. We don't know what happens in the weeks leading up to these games that change the complexion of what we watch on a given Sunday. Every Sunday, if we haven't learned that by now, is completely different in this league.
MG, we know you'll be on the air on 97.3 ESPN Sports Bash later on this afternoon. Have a good time then. We had a good time talking to you here. Thanks, bud.
Thanks,
Mike.
Mike.
All right, we'll see you.